The year was 1863. The American Civil War had already turned fields into graveyards and towns into broken memories. Across the divided nation, families whispered prayers beside candlelight, while soldiers marched through smoke and mud beneath torn flags. In a small town outside Nashville, Tennessee, 14-year-old Elijah Carter stood beside the railroad tracks every evening, waiting for the same train. Not because he loved trains. Because every train carried ghosts. The iron monster screamed through town at sunset, its black smoke curling into the red sky like something alive. Soldiers sat inside the wooden cars, young men with tired eyes and bandaged arms. Some laughed loudly to hide their fear. Some stared silently into the distance. And some never returned. Elijah watched them all. His father had boarded one of those trains 2 years earlier. "Take care of your mother," his father had said while kneeling beside him. Those were the last words Elijah ever heard from him. 3 months later, a folded Union flag arrived instead. No body. No grave. Just silence. Since then, Elijah had hated the railroad. But every evening, he still came. Because somewhere deep inside him, he believed one impossible thing. Maybe one day his father would step off the train alive. The station master, an old veteran named Samuel Briggs, noticed the boy every evening. "You can't wait forever," Samuel finally said one cold October night. Elijah never looked away from the tracks. "I know." "Then why keep coming?" Elijah swallowed hard. "Because if I stop, it means he's really gone." Samuel said nothing. The train thundered past. The ground shook. And for one brief moment, Elijah imagined he saw his father standing near one of the windows. But it was only smoke. Always smoke. That same night, something happened that changed everything. A wounded soldier stumbled off the freight car after the train stopped for water. He collapsed onto the dirt road beside the station. People rushed toward him. Blood soaked through his blue Union coat. Elijah ran closer. The man grabbed Elijah's arm with surprising strength. "Listen carefully," the soldier whispered. His voice shook. "They're moving prisoners south. Hundreds of them." Samuel Briggs leaned down. "Who's moving them?" "The Confederates." The soldier coughed blood. "There's a train leaving in 2 nights. If nobody stops it, those men will disappear forever." Then the soldier reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather journal. "Take this to Washington," he said. Samuel frowned. "That's impossible." The soldier stared directly at Elijah. "No," he whispered. "It's not." And then he died. The station fell silent. Wind swept dust across the tracks. Samuel slowly picked up the journal. Inside were names, maps, military routes, and something else. A list of secret Confederate supply lines stretching across Tennessee. Information powerful enough to change battles. Powerful enough to save lives. Samuel looked at Elijah. The boy suddenly understood. This wasn't just a journal. It was a mission. And missions came with danger. Outside the station, thunder rolled across the dark horizon. The war was coming closer. And before the week ended, Elijah Carter would be forced to choose between fear and courage. The next morning, Elijah woke to shouting outside. He rushed from bed and looked through the window. Smoke rose beyond the hills. Black smoke. His mother stepped onto the porch beside him. "Stay inside," she whispered. But Elijah already knew something was wrong. Riders galloped down the road toward town. Refugees followed behind them. Women carrying children. Old men dragging wagons. One horse collapsed in the mud from exhaustion. "Confederate raiders!" someone shouted. "They burned the Harper farm!" Elijah's stomach tightened. The Harper farm stood only 5 miles away. He had played there as a child. Without thinking, he grabbed his coat and ran. "Elijah!" his mother screamed. But he kept running. The closer he came, the worse the smell became. Burned wood. Smoke. Death. When he finally reached the farm, Flames still crackled across the barn. The house had collapsed inward. Bodies lay covered beside the fence. Elijah froze. This wasn't war from newspapers. This wasn't stories from soldiers. This was real. A little girl sat beside the ruins holding a broken doll. She stared blankly at the fire. Elijah slowly approached. "Where's your family?" The girl looked up. "They took my brother." Her voice sounded empty. "Who?" "The soldiers." Elijah felt ice in his chest. That night, Samuel Briggs visited Elijah's home carrying the leather journal. "We leave tomorrow," Samuel said. Elijah's mother immediately shook her head. "No." Samuel placed the journal on the table. "If this reaches Union command, they may stop the prison train." "And if it doesn't?" she asked. Samuel hesitated. "More families disappear." Silence filled the room. Finally, Elijah spoke. "I'll go." His mother turned toward him in shock. "You're 14. And people are dying." Tears filled her eyes. "You sound just like your father." Elijah lowered his head. For a moment, nobody moved. Then his mother walked to the cabinet and removed an old revolver wrapped in cloth. "It belonged to him," she whispered. She handed it to Elijah. "Bring yourself home. That matters more than any war." Elijah nodded. But deep inside, he already knew something. The boy who left tomorrow would not be the same boy who returned. Rain hammered the roof of the freight train as Elijah and Samuel hid inside a cattle car heading north. The journey to Washington would take days. If Confederate patrols discovered them, they could be executed as spies. Samuel checked the journal again beneath lantern light. "These routes are real," he muttered. "How do you know?" Elijah asked. "Because I fought in these towns." Samuel stared into the darkness. "I've seen what this war does to people." Elijah sat quietly. After hours of silence, the train suddenly slowed. Voices echoed outside. Confederate soldiers. Samuel extinguished the lantern instantly. Boots climbed onto the freight car. Elijah held his breath. The door slid open. Lantern light cut through darkness. A soldier stepped inside. He scanned the car. Then paused. Elijah's hand tightened around the revolver. The soldier moved closer. Closer. Then another voice shouted from outside. "Nothing there! Move on!" The soldier spat onto the floor and jumped down. The door slammed shut. Elijah exhaled shakily. Samuel smiled faintly. "You kept your nerve. I thought we were dead." "So did I." The train continued north through storm and darkness. Near midnight, Elijah heard movement from the corner of the car. He raised the lantern. A girl emerged from beneath a pile of blankets. She couldn't have been older than 16. Samuel immediately stood. "Who are you?" The girl stared defiantly at them. "My name is Clara Whitmore. What are you doing here?" "Hiding." Samuel narrowed his eyes. "From who?" She hesitated. "Everyone." Elijah noticed bruises on her wrists. And fear in her eyes. Samuel slowly lowered himself back down. "You're running from the war too?" Clara shook her head. "No." Her voice trembled. "I'm running because my father sells prisoners to Confederate camps." The train rattled loudly beneath them. Elijah stared at her. "You knew?" She nodded. "I heard him talking about the prison train." Samuel's face hardened. "When does it leave?" "Tomorrow night." Silence. One day. That was all the time left. Samuel looked at Elijah. Their mission had suddenly become far bigger than delivering a journal. Now they had a chance to stop the train itself. If they survived long enough. As the train moved north, Samuel told stories from the battlefield. Not heroic stories. Real stories. Stories newspapers never printed. He described Gettysburg. The screams. The mud soaked red with blood. Young boys crying for mothers who would never hear them again. Clara listened silently. Elijah could barely breathe. "Why keep fighting?" he finally asked. Samuel looked out the cracked wooden wall toward the passing forests. "Because if nobody fights evil, evil wins." Those words stayed with Elijah. The next afternoon, the freight train stopped outside a small Union-controlled town. Samuel decided to gather supplies. "Stay hidden," he warned. But only 20 minutes later, gunshots echoed outside. Elijah peeked through the crack. Confederate cavalry had entered town. People screamed and ran. Samuel sprinted toward the train carrying food. "Go!" he shouted. The engineer blew the whistle. The train lurched forward. Samuel jumped for the moving freight car. Missed. And crashed onto the dirt. Elijah screamed. Confederate riders closed in around Samuel instantly. The old man drew his revolver. One against many. Samuel looked toward the moving train. Toward Elijah. Then he shouted something Elijah would never forget. "Finish the mission!" Gunfire exploded. Clara pulled Elijah away from the door. But Elijah had already seen enough. Samuel Briggs collapsed beneath the horses. The train carried them away. And Elijah realized something terrible. Now it was up to him. 3 days later, Elijah and Clara finally arrived in Washington. The capital looked nothing like Elijah imagined. Hospitals overflowed with wounded soldiers. Smoke rose from factories building weapons. Crowds packed the muddy streets. War had transformed the city into a machine. And everyone inside it looked exhausted. Elijah carried the journal beneath his coat as they pushed through soldiers and wagons. "How do we find the army?" Clara asked. "We find someone important." "That's your plan?" "It's all I've got." Near the War Department building, guards blocked their path. No visitors. Elijah held out the journal. This could stop a Confederate prison transport. The guard laughed. So could magic. Suddenly, a voice interrupted. "Let the boy speak." An officer stepped from the building. Tall. Bearded. Sharp-eyed. His name was Colonel Nathaniel Reed. Elijah explained everything. Samuel. The dying soldier. The prison train. The routes in the journal. Reed listened carefully. Then opened the journal. His expression changed immediately. "Where did you get this?" Elijah swallowed. "A Union soldier gave it to us before he died." Reed turned several pages quickly. "This information is accurate." He looked directly at Elijah. "You may have just saved thousands of lives." Clara spoke softly. "But the prison train leaves tonight." Reed's face hardened. "Then we don't have much time." Within minutes, soldiers prepared horses. Elijah stood stunned as Union officers rushed around them. The mission had become real. Colonel Reed mounted his horse. "You two stay here." Elijah shook his head instantly. "No." Reed frowned. "This is war." "I know." The colonel stared at him for several seconds. Then finally nodded. "Fine." As thunder rolled above Washington, Elijah climbed onto a wagon beside armed soldiers. Ahead of them waited Confederate territory. And somewhere in the darkness, a train full of prisoners racing toward disappearance. The Union force traveled through the night. Rain soaked the roads. Mud slowed the horses. Every hour mattered. Colonel Reed studied maps beneath lantern light. "The prison train must cross Black Creek Bridge before dawn," he explained. "If we destroy the bridge, the train stops," Elijah finished. Reed nodded. "But Confederate guards will protect it heavily." Clara sat silently nearby. Finally she spoke. "My father may be there." Nobody answered. Before sunrise, they reached the hills overlooking Black Creek. Elijah saw the bridge below. Massive. Steel. Stretching across dark water. Confederate soldiers guarded both ends. And far in the distance, a train whistle echoed. "It's coming," someone whispered. Reed turned to his men. "Move!" Gunfire erupted instantly. Union soldiers charged downhill. Confederates fired from sandbags. Smoke filled the air. Elijah crouched behind rocks as bullets shattered trees around him. This was no longer a story. This was survival. Clara spotted dynamite crates near the bridge supports. "If we light those, we can collapse the bridge," Elijah said. They sprinted through gunfire. A Confederate soldier saw them. "Stop!" He raised his rifle. Clara fired first. The soldier fell. Her hands trembled afterward. "I've never." "There's no time," Elijah said. The train whistle screamed louder now. Closer. Closer. Elijah lit the fuse. Sparks raced toward the dynamite. Then a voice shouted behind them. "Clara!" She froze. A Confederate officer stood near the tracks. Her father. He stared at her in disbelief. "You betrayed us?" Clara's eyes filled with tears. "You betrayed humanity." The officer reached for his pistol. But the explosion came first. The bridge shattered apart in a storm of fire and steel. The prison train screamed as tracks vanished beneath it. Cars twisted. Wood splintered. Metal crashed into the river below. The world exploded into chaos. And just like that, hundreds of prisoners were free. Morning light rose over the destroyed bridge. Broken train cars burned beside the river. Survivors stumbled through smoke and mud. Union soldiers helped prisoners climb from the wreckage. Many were starving. Some could barely walk. Others cried openly after realizing they were alive. Elijah stood silently near the riverbank. He watched one old prisoner kneel in the mud and kiss the ground. Freedom. Something so simple. Something so powerful. Colonel Reed approached Elijah. "You did good." Elijah looked at the destroyed train. "So many people died." Reed nodded slowly. "That's war." Clara walked toward them carrying blankets for the prisoners. Her face looked older somehow. Harder. Elijah understood the feeling. War changed people quickly. One freed prisoner suddenly grabbed Elijah's arm. "You're Carter's boy." Elijah froze. "What?" "Your father." The man coughed weakly. "He saved my life at Shiloh." Elijah's heart pounded. "You knew him?" The prisoner nodded. "He talked about you constantly." Elijah struggled to speak. "Did you see what happened to him?" The man's expression darkened. "He wasn't killed immediately." Elijah's breathing stopped. "What do you mean?" "He was captured." Everything around Elijah seemed to disappear. Captured. Not dead. Alive. Or at least, alive once. The prisoner continued. "They took him south to a labor camp in Georgia." Elijah stared into the smoke. A new mission had just begun. Most people would have gone home. The mission was complete. The prisoners were saved. The journal reached Union command. But Elijah Carter couldn't stop now. Not after hearing the truth. His father might still be alive. Colonel Reed strongly disagreed. "Georgia is dangerous territory." "I don't care." "You should." Elijah met the colonel's eyes. "He's my father." Reed sighed heavily. Finally, he handed Elijah a folded map. "There's a labor camp near Savannah. If your father survived, that's where he'd be." Clara immediately said, "I'm coming too." Elijah frowned. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." "Why?" She looked away. "Because I'm tired of running." 3 days later, they headed south disguised as refugees. The deeper they traveled into Confederate territory, the worse conditions became. Towns starved. Children begged beside roads. Hospitals overflowed with wounded soldiers. The South was bleeding. One evening, they stopped at a church shelter filled with war refugees. An elderly woman served soup quietly. "War makes monsters of governments," she whispered. "But sometimes it also reveals heroes." Elijah thought about Samuel Briggs. About the prisoners. About his father. And for the first time, he realized history wasn't only made by generals. Sometimes it was shaped by ordinary people forced into impossible moments. That night, Confederate soldiers searched the shelter. Everyone panicked. Elijah hid the revolver beneath loose floorboards. Boots thundered through the church. Then one soldier stopped directly before Elijah. "You from Tennessee?" Elijah nodded carefully. "What's your name?" "Elijah Cooper." The lie nearly failed. But the soldier moved on. After they left, Clara whispered something Elijah would never forget. "Fear keeps you alive, but courage keeps you human." Savannah looked beautiful from a distance. Tall trees, white buildings, coastal fog rolling through the streets. But beauty can hide cruelty. Outside the city stood the labor camp. Barbed fences, watchtowers, guards with rifles. Men worked beneath the burning sun carrying timber and railroad steel. Most looked half dead. Elijah stared through binoculars. "Do you see him?" Clara asked. No. But hope remained. That night, they snuck closer through marshland. Mosquitoes swarmed. Mud swallowed their boots. A guard tower spotlight swept across the ground. Elijah's heart hammered. One mistake meant death. They reached the outer fence after midnight. Then Elijah heard singing. Soft. Weak. Prisoners singing together in the darkness. Not because they were happy. Because songs reminded them they were still human. Clara cut through the wire carefully. Elijah crawled inside. Prisoners stared at him in shock. "I'm looking for Daniel Carter," Elijah whispered. Nobody answered at first. Then an older prisoner slowly pointed toward the far barracks. "He's there." Elijah's legs nearly gave out. Alive. He rushed across the mud, opened the barracks door, and froze. A thin man slowly looked up from the corner. Older. Weaker. But unmistakable. "Elijah?" The boy could barely breathe. "Dad?" For several seconds neither moved. Then Daniel Carter stumbled forward and embraced his son. Years of grief shattered instantly. Both cried openly. Outside, thunder rolled across the night sky. And for one brief moment, the war disappeared. Only family remained. There was only one problem. Getting out. Daniel explained the camp schedule quickly. "Guard change happens at dawn." "That's our chance," Elijah said. But Daniel shook his head. "You can't free everyone." Elijah looked around the crowded barracks. Starving men stared back at him. Hope burned in their eyes. Clara whispered softly. "We can't leave them." Daniel closed his eyes. "That's exactly what will get you killed." Outside, whistles echoed. A patrol moved closer. Elijah made a decision. "We free as many as we can." Daniel stared at his son. Not as a child anymore, but as a man. The plan formed quickly. At dawn, Clara would create a fire near the supply shed. When guards rushed toward the flames, prisoners would overwhelm the remaining soldiers. Simple. Dangerous. Possibly suicidal. Perfect. Hours later, dawn approached. Clara lit the fire. Flames exploded upward. Guards shouted. Chaos spread instantly. Daniel kicked open the barracks doors. "Run!" Prisoners flooded into the yard. Gunfire erupted. Men fought with bare hands. Some fell. Others kept running. Elijah grabbed a rifle from a fallen guard. The camp descended into madness. Then alarm bells rang from the towers. Reinforcements. Too many. Daniel grabbed Elijah's shoulder. "We have to go now." But Elijah looked back. Prisoners still struggled near the fence. Without thinking, he turned and charged back into gunfire. "Elijah!" Daniel screamed. The boy cut through the remaining wire with shaking hands. More prisoners escaped. Bullets slammed into the dirt beside him. Then suddenly, pain. A bullet tore through Elijah's shoulder. He collapsed. The world blurred. Daniel reached him first. Together they stumbled into the swamp as the camp burned behind them. And for the first time in years, Daniel Carter was free. The Civil War ended in 1865. But wars never truly end. Not for the people who survived them. Elijah returned home older than his years. His father survived. Clara stayed with the Carter family. Samuel Briggs was buried beside the railroad tracks he once watched over. America celebrated peace. But the country remained deeply wounded. Cities were destroyed. Families divided. More than 600,000 people had died. And yet, something extraordinary also emerged from the ashes. A new beginning. Former slaves built communities. Railroads connected distant states. Factories transformed cities. The nation slowly rebuilt itself. Years later, Elijah stood again beside the same railroad tracks from his childhood. But now the trains carried something different. Families. Workers. Dreamers. Hope. His father joined him quietly. "You still watch the trains?" Elijah smiled. "Not for ghosts anymore." A train thundered past beneath the golden sunset. Children waved from the windows. No soldiers. No smoke from battlefields. Just movement. Progress. America changing before their eyes. Daniel looked toward the horizon. "You know," he said softly, "history will remember generals and presidents." Elijah nodded. "But the country was really saved by ordinary people. Samuel. The prisoners. Refugees. Mothers. Children. Workers. Farmers. People history books rarely mention. And maybe that was the true story of America. Not perfection. Not power. But resilience. The ability to fall apart and rebuild again. As darkness settled across Tennessee, Elijah Carter realized something important. The war had taken his childhood, but it had also given him purpose. And somewhere in the distance, another train whistle echoed through the night. This time, it no longer sounded like grief. It sounded like the future. Decades later, an old Elijah Carter would tell this story to his grandchildren beside a fireplace. America had changed dramatically. New inventions filled cities. Cars replaced horses. Electric lights replaced candles. But Elijah always reminded them of one thing. Freedom is never guaranteed. Every generation must protect it. Not only with weapons, but with courage, with kindness, with sacrifice, and with the willingness to stand against injustice when it matters most. Because history is not only written by famous leaders. It is written every day by ordinary people making difficult choices. And sometimes, one brave decision can change everything. The end.